Okay, it's official, right?
Yes, except you. Wait, unmute you. Oh,
Mute
wait.
myself. Okay, it is official. We are now recording now that I'm unmuted. So hello, everyone, and welcome. And I'm so honored to be back here. And some of what I'll be covering tonight may be things that you've already heard. Some of what I'm covering you may not find useful at all, but I'm hoping that for everybody that is here, there is some nugget of helpfulness that they can take with them. Before I get started with my sort of formal presentation, just a few words about who I am. So I am a speech and language pathologist. And I've been practicing in the field of speech pathology for over 20 years. I met Cynthia when we both worked at Duke. It was immediate chemistry, charisma, getting to know Cindy because she was very interested in the crossover, the intersection between communication and mental health. And I've spent years, working with individuals of all ages with, communication difficulties. And what I have discovered is that it's very rare to have somebody with a longstanding communication issue who doesn't have some sort of anxiety or stress or some sort of mental health challenge that is concomitant or that accompanies that communication challenge. And conversely, Cindy and I have also noticed that when there's a mood disorder or some kind of emotional behavioral challenge with a child or an adult, we also see that there are some communication issues. Sometimes they're transient and sometimes they're, longstanding. So the focus of tonight is to just sort of try to bring those two things together and hopefully give you some practical ideas. The two main things well, let me back up and say just a little bit more about me personally, is that I also am the parent of a young woman who has autism spectrum disorder, and she has, anxiety and depression. As a result, and probably also, at baseline. And so I understand what it's like to not only treat individuals like that in individual sessions, but also live with somebody like that and parent them and love them and care for them. So I've learned a lot across this whole journey. And so some of the things that I'll be talking about tonight are language, the levels of language, how we use language in different settings. Another thing that Cindy and I thought could be helpful is to talk about our own communication features and talk about how we might either disclose our own features of communication to others, or how we might help our loved ones if they have to have a disclosure situation in the workplace or at school. And I think we'll have some time at the end for questions and answers, and maybe Cindy, if we feel moved, we'll do a role play. So without further ado, let's go. And I also apologize because I am a bit of a noob with Zoom. So let me make sure I know what I'm presenting here before we get started. Slideshow, here we go. Ta-da! Okay. So here we go. And so this is me. So I'm going to start off with a really overwhelming and potentially confusing slide, but we may refer back to this. And so if we're thinking about communication, a person's total communication setup, or like how their brain is wired. We think about here at the bottom, down here, where it says experiences environment, we think about that infant who's living in an environment where they're cared for by their parents, where their parents are talking to them, listening to them, picking them up when they cry, they're looking at the sun, they're understanding when it's dark outside, and they're picking up all kinds of cues from that early environment. And from that comes this, around about 18 months, comes this idea of pragmatic language. And so it's not necessarily spoken language. In fact, it's everything, it can be spoken language, but it's mostly about reading nonverbal cues, interpreting someone's emotions, reading their facial expressions. And we see that that comes in really quite early. And then we have the phonological system, which is the sound system, the way that we put sounds to build words and then words to build sentences, which is the next level. Semantics. Syntax is as things get more complex, we have more complex grammatical structures. And then we use all of this when we're doing discourse. And discourse could be written language, it could be conversation, it could be you have to write a paper when you're in college. It's all levels of reading, listening, writing, speaking, thinking. And so what some of the reason I'm presenting all of this is because there can be breakdowns at any or all of these levels, but in particular when there's a breakdown in pragmatic language, which we often see in mood disorders, it affects the whole, it's the foundation, and so it affects the whole communication picture. So, feel free, we can ask questions and talk about this later. So if we're looking at how educators or people in my discipline talk about levels of language use, if we think about this idea of Bloom's taxonomy, which is Bloom as an educator, and he helps teachers understand what kinds of tasks are appropriate for different ages. So if we're thinking about early elementary school, we're just thinking about recognition of the general situation, remembering things from the past, and using words, whether it's in tasks or whether it's, conversations with people. You're identifying, you're drawing pictures, you're memorizing, you're quoting, you might be reciting poems, and you're answering basic questions: where, when, who, what, why, how. Your narrative structure, how you retell events, is usually just a short description, a description of actions. We went to the store, then we went to the park, we ate lunch, we came home. Whew, I was tired. Kind of simple. Now, within this, sometimes we see that, we'll come back to level one later as we keep talking. So if we move forward to the next level, in terms of just development, we're thinking about emerging skills, like identifying problems and maybe even thinking about solutions. And this is in late elementary school. So you're not only are you recognizing the situation, but you're identifying problems, and maybe you're generating some solutions. Maybe you're understanding the causal chain. There's a cause and this is the effect. It rained, so we couldn't go outside. And then the narrative structure would be, a reactive sequence. My dog ate my homework and I felt so frustrated, that kind of thing. As we move up the levels of language, we get much more into problem solving in middle school and early high school. We evaluate, we compare, we think more deeply, we judge whether something is accurate. We might criticize, a piece of literature or decide if we like it or not. We understand multiple points of view. we generate a plan. And at this point, we're understanding life, we're understanding our own life and the lives of others, and we're retelling events in clear, coherent episodes. And then the sort of highest level, or the higher order of thinking, the level of discourse, where we're really synthesizing and problem solving, we're developing arguments. This happens later in high school and college, and then into your career, however you use language in your career. And the reason I go through all of this is so that you understand sort of the foundation, the developmental processes, and the and sort of the complex ways in which language can be used. And so the thing about all of that is that the things that I just discussed occur up here in the frontal lobe and in the cerebral cortex, the left and right side of the brain, towards the front. And so a lot of, even somebody who's a typically developing person without a mood disorder, when they find themselves in a stressful situation, there's this little green part right here that's the size of an almond, called the amygdala, and it takes over all of these higher order functions that we just talked about. So when you're talking about the conditions of a mood disorder, if you're having a depressive episode, if you're having, if you have PTSD and you're getting triggered, this amygdala is going to put you into fight or flight response, and it's going to mostly shut down these higher order functions, and it will affect your communication. And so if we think about all those levels of language, and we think about the person in front of us, regardless of age, we want to think about going back to recognition of the general situation. Do you understand what's happening? What are your basic internal states? Can you communicate your basic internal states? Who, what, where, when, why? Why did this happen? Can you identify if a person is, pardon me, I just wolfed down my dinner before this, so my throat is a little, it's a little scratchy. So if you're working with a person who is, just sort of understanding that, recognizing the general situation, can you nudge them a little in the direction of, okay, do you see a problem here? Is there a problem? Can I help you solve it? How do you want to solve it? What do you think? We're not going to get into level 4. We're not going to be persuading. We're not going to be presenting arguments. We're not going to be critiquing. We're going to be doing much lower level functions with our language when a person is in the middle of an episode. So it's really important to think about how we use language in different situations. And then there's this, if we think back to that first slide and that gray base of pragmatic language, which is also social language, we think about, we're using this social language, whether it's interpreting gestures, facial expressions, whether it's engaging in small talk. We are engaging our social brain anytime we're sharing physical space with people, and even virtual space. Right now, we are all using social language, even if you're being quiet. And by the way, thank you for not talking out, because that is, you figured out that that's the expectation. So when we're composing a text or an email, when we're participating in these Zoom calls, when we're going to meetings, study groups, project groups, sitting in a classroom, watching movies, all of these things exert effort on our social brain. And I think the key thing, that whether you're a provider, whether you're a parent, whether you're a support person, that when we're trying to access mental health supports, we use social and narrative language, sometimes at the highest levels. And sometimes folks can't access mental health services, even with a supportive person, because their language system is a bit shut down. And so the onus is on us to figure out at what level can a person access these supports? At what level do I need to access supports? What are my communication features? That's something that Cindy and I have been talking about, is using very concrete terms to think about how you communicate so that you develop your own awareness. And that helps you be more relational with other people. And we'll get into that in a second. And some of the features over the years that Cindy and I have identified in individuals who are either in the middle of an episode or have some of these chronic challenges, difficulty comprehending nonverbal communication, nonverbal cues in a conversation, overly literal thinkers, difficulty with conversational reciprocity. And that's a fancy way of saying back and forth. You know, like maybe the person doesn't ask you follow-up questions, and then you wonder, is this person interested in what I'm saying? Maybe the person, you know, only does a data dump, as we see down here, that sort of data dumping, which is just like downloading everything that's in your brain all at once without judging whether the person is interested, do they care? And that can be difficult for a lot of reasons. Poor ability to provide context for a story or perceive what a listener needs to know. Okay, that goes back to level 1, recognition of the general situation. What is the general situation that I'm in? Is it appropriate to talk about this? Misinterpretation or misuse of facial expression and body language, difficulty processing your own internal states, and therefore not recognizing when somebody else is having a different internal state or an unhappy. Whopping topic changes without warning. Okay, guilty. I do that all the time. I know that's one of my features. When I'm in conversation with somebody, I try to be aware so that I don't do that, because it can come across as odd. Sometimes inflexibility, arguing a point, getting stuck, perseverating. And then we're thinking about reduced theory of mind. Now, also, some of you may have heard this idea of theory of mind before, but it's basically understanding that the other person or people have a different idea than you have a different point of view, and understanding that you may know or not know what that is. And sometimes when you have impaired theory of mind, you think that that person is on the same page as you, their thoughts and feelings are the same as yours. And that can be a challenge in therapy, or in relationships. So some of what Cindy and I had talked about is sort of do's and don'ts with disclosure. If you're aware of yourself or your person that you care about has some of these sort of different communication features, it can be helpful to disclose them so that your coworkers understand them, or so that the people that you're in relationships understand them. So it's better not to say, oh, I spaced on that, I'm just ADD, oh well. Or I'm twice exceptional and my IQ is 140, but I'm not so good with details. That is not something that is information that is helpful to that other person. Whereas if you say, like I just said, in conversations, I tend to switch topics quickly because I worry that I will forget what I'm thinking about. Sometimes that can come across as not caring about what the other person is saying. If that happens, I hope you'll let me know. That's more relational, and that shows that you've thought about how you're coming across to the person and you care about your impact on them. Another suggestion would be, I need clear and literal instructions and explanations so that I know what's expected with me, whether that's at the workplace, whether that's whether that's, you know, it in the family setting with a partner or a spouse